Squarespace makes it easy to turn your idea into a unique website, showcase your work, blog or publish content, even sell products and services of all kinds in just a few clicks. You can customize everything from the look and feel to settings and products using beautiful templates created by world-class designers. And there's nothing to install, patch or upgrade ever. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code MU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 19, Episode 9. Coming up on the show, we've got the Bosco Doomsday Device, the incident at Devil's Den, and the Texas Terror Zone. I'm Benjamin Grundy, joining me is Aaron Wright.
I don't know how I managed to do it, but somehow the Texas Terror Zone is nicely connected to the Bosco Doomsday Device.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
It's all going to be revealed coming up in the Plus extension on this show. Well, you see, recently I've been looking into the research of the late researcher Rob Riggs, and a really fascinating guy, and he's typical of all these people that get involved in paranormal phenomena. When you start looking at it, it starts looking back, and it always starts off being very simple. Like you might hear of a UFO encounter, and then you'll happen to have one. But the more that you start investigating it, the more that it seems that it escalates and starts trying to push back against you. And this is something that Rob has experienced, a lot throughout his career. So I started looking into his research, which led me into the research of Tom Burnett, who have done a lot of investigation into Big Thicket in Texas, which is that large...
Big Thicket?
So Big Thicket is this large forested area in Texas, and it has this long road called the Big Road that runs directly through the middle of it. And there's just years, if not centuries, worth of encounters that people have had heading into this space. And it all comes back to this one connection, this one phenomenon that seems to be repeating over and over and over, that seems to just spread out. I liken it to the paranormal pluripotent stem cells. So you know how we have stem cells inside our body, and they're cells that can differentiate into anything. They can turn into nerve cells or bone cells, whatever else. Pretty much this is the same from the paranormal. We commonly discuss this underlying intelligence that seems to be behind a lot of this phenomenon. But how does it actually manifest in this world? And what I'm going to go into in Texas might give us some, not answers, but certainly an interesting concept as to what may be occurring.
Interesting. Did you hear about the guy last week that injected stem cells into his penis to make it bigger?
No. And what an idiot.
It worked, apparently, according to him.
Yeah, right.
His evidence that was my wife enjoyed it, and that was it.
Oh my God.
You didn't see that? Apparently there's some merit to it. He's one of those biohacker guys, so he just does all the experiments on himself.
Oh, dear God.
And he claims he did all the safety measures, he double-checked everything, he did a lot of reading, got his own, it was his own stem cells, and then injected them.
But what could, okay, so here's a really good example of what could go wrong, is that, pluripotent stem cells, or stem cells in general, you have to coax them in a certain direction. I mean, yeah, you can put them next to similar cells, but if he put it next to a blood vessel, he could just have massive blood vessels growing in his penis, which could burst during intercourse. There's so many dangerous things. I don't want to begin where that's wrong.
Okay, I'll cancel my appointment then.
so, what have you got coming? Let's move on from penises for the second time this week.
It might actually cross over with what you have coming up, because I'm going to be going into a brand new book from Terry Lovelace. It's entitled The Incident at Devil's Den. And Devil's Den is a state park in Arkansas, and you might be familiar with the name because it appeared quite a bit in David Paulides' The Devil's in the Details Missing 411 book.
Oh, that's where I recall it from. Yeah, I do. I remember that.
So a very large, thick state park, state forest, and people go missing. Now, Terry Lovelace, the author of this book, The Incident at Devil's Den, is a former Assistant Attorney General, a trustworthy guy, and he's been sitting on some experiences centered around this incident at Devil's Den, and he hasn't told anyone for decades. The only person who knew about the incident was his wife, and now he's been kind of urged to come forward. Something happened to him recently, which I'll cover in a moment, which pushed him to come forward and reveal these decades of experiences that followed this incident at Devil's Den.
Yeah, you were telling me a little bit about this yesterday, and it really makes me wonder how many people are out there, because this guy was a respected, and still is, a respected member of the community, and he was so reluctant to come up with his story for so long because of his position in the legal fraternity.
Yeah, he knew it would destroy his career. So it's just sat on this for years.
It's got to make you wonder how many people out there that are in these positions in the community that haven't revealed their stories because they're so terrified of it destroying their reputation. So
Terry Lovelace is a 64-year-old lawyer, former Assistant Attorney General, as I said. And in 2012, a routine X-ray of his leg found an anomalous bit of metal the size of a fingernail with 2 tiny wires attached. And this
embedded inside.
Yeah, inside his leg. And this is what spurred on all these memories, again, going back to this incident in 1977. So in the preface to this book, they talk a little bit about Devil's Den State Park. Again, it's in northwestern Arkansas, beautiful place. But he says, beneath the scenic forests and limestone outcropping, there lies a mystery. People from Devil's Den go missing. And there's a very recent case from late last year in August. Devil's Den claimed a 33-year-old man from Bartlesville in Oklahoma. His story struck a chord with the author of the book, who said during a hiking trip along the Butterfield Trail, Rodney Letterman became separated from his friends and vanished. To date, all that's been found of Letterman was his cell phone left lying at their campsite. His hometown paper, the Bartlesville Examiner, stated in December of 2017, 2,500 acres have been searched. Nothing's been found. Not a shred of evidence. Not a piece of clothing, not a footprint. Nothing. Just his cell phone left behind at the campsite. The Washington County, Arkansas Sheriff John Schuster stated in that newspaper report that all we have found is his cell phone. We'd like to hear from anyone who might know something about the case. So this is very recent. December last year, someone's just gone missing from this forest, or as of December last year, they're still missing. And then decades earlier, this is one of the cases that was detailed in David Paulides' first or second book, Missing 411. There was this disappearance in June of 1946 of the Van Alst family from Pittsburgh. They were camping out at Devil's Den. A family of 4, and it was actually their 8-year-old daughter, Catherine, who went missing. Now, we know from this case that Catherine vanished from the family's campsite and this desperate search effort began. The details are kind of scant, but her appearance was documented in the hometown newspaper for her, the Pittsburgh Press.
This was in the 70s?
This is 1940s.
40s, okay.
Yeah, so June the 24th, 1946, it ran this story where a week after she went missing, she was found. So this is one of those rare missing 411 cases where she's found alive. And her rescuer was a University of Arkansas search volunteer, a 19-year-old named Chadwick. And he was quoted as saying, I called out Catherine's name and she just walked out of this small cave dressed in her bathing suit. She just very calmly said, here I am. Now, the case was detailed again in David's book, but he explained how the details with this just didn't add up. Catherine was found 7 air miles and 600 feet elevation from their original campsite. And to reach that point, you've got to go on this 20-mile trek, zigzagging through really rugged, rough terrain. She didn't have shoes, and she had no scratches on her at all. How the hell did she get up there?
Was she displaying any elements of exposure or
no,
hypothermia?
She's totally fine. No hypothermia. She wasn't dehydrated. She was dazed and had no memory of what had occurred. Absolutely no memory at all. The area where she was found had been searched over and over by volunteers. Which is classic for all those missing 411 cases. By air support and by volunteers. And the report from the guy that found her, he just said she was eerily calm. It was really, really strange. She spent a total of 6 nights in the wilderness and she just had a few insect bites. That was it. The quote from her mother echoed his quotes. She said her daughter was utterly serene. A weird choice of words for someone who's just gone missing from their family for a week in the wilderness. Especially with children, right? You'd expect that the child would be quite distressed and be crying and seeking their parents. To be serene is a very unusual state. Well, again, I mentioned that she was completely hydrated. She clearly had access to water, except they noted that there was no water in this area. There wasn't a stream, there wasn't a river close by. She didn't have any potable water with her. So how did she stay hydrated? Where the hell was she? No mention of that in the details. So Terry, the author, he actually tried to locate her. He tried to track down this Catherine Van Alst. She would be about 70 years old now. He said he was unsuccessful, but the reason he wanted to speak with her is he wondered if Devil's Den had plagued her sleep the way Devil's Den had plagued his sleep for half a century. He said, "I'm grateful to have survived Devil's Den. It cost my friend his life at age 28. So great preface, and I thought this might be interesting. We might get some insights into the missing 411 phenomenon as well. These missing people vanishing in the wilderness across the world. In the introduction, he said, "I'm a retired lawyer who spent many years in state government as a prosecutor and as an assistant attorney general. During my professional career, I didn't disclose these things for fear of losing my job and standing in the legal community. So my wife and I kept these experiences to ourselves for 41 years. I had no intent to resurrect the events of 4 decades ago. I planned to take the story to my grave." But he said that was until 2012, when an anomalous piece of metal found in my knee changed things dramatically. He said it was the catalyst to write this book and make a full and candid disclosure of everything relevant. So from here, he gives a bit of a backstory of how he picked up running in the 1980s. And this is when Nike started making specific running shoes, and it became kind of a fad to go jogging. And he has this little section in the book where he says how his father, who was from the older generation, of course, just thought it was so absurd. Why would anyone go running? Just the idea was foreign and ridiculous.
Yeah,
the only reason you would go running is if you were running away from someone.
Yeah.
The idea of just doing it for fun just sounded crazy. It was ludicrous. But it became a bit of an obsession for Terry. He said he built up his endurance. He worked his way from 1 mile a day to 1.5 miles and then 2. And after he hit the 2-mile mark, he started getting better at running, doing it every day. He noticed something odd. It had never happened before, but just above his right knee was a spot about the size of a $50 that tingled and was kind of numb. And with a pin, he could trace its borders underneath his skin. He said it had a clearly defined edge, and this numb spot didn't really make any sense to him. And like clockwork, it would kind of appear every time he hit that 2-mile mark. Would just get this numb sensation. Didn't really interfere with his life, didn't even really interfere with his running. It was just this weird thing. So he went to see a doctor, and this is in his late 20s, early 30s. And the doctor said, "Look, if it doesn't hurt, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Just ignore it." The doctor kind of blew it off. So he really did. He just ignored it. And running became this big habit for him. It became an obsession over the next 40 years. But throughout all those years, that numb spot would always be there, without exception, every run. It would last for about an hour or so and then just fade away. But then one morning, it was October the 23rd back in 2012, he woke up to find he couldn't put any weight on his right leg. His right knee was so painful he couldn't walk, and he was fine the day before. He tries to get out of bed and immediately falls down trying. Now, his wife drove him out to the VA hospital because he's a veteran and had his knee checked out. He said, "I didn't believe my leg could be broken since I hadn't taken a hard fall or experienced any other kind of incident." So he describes meeting up with the physician, and the physician takes him in for an x-ray. They align his knee, they take an x-ray, they take another from another angle, and the physician, she kind of walks out and comes back in with this odd look on her face, and she takes another x-ray and then another x-ray, and then looks kind of confused and leaves again, comes back in again, takes another x-ray and another x-ray.
How many would you need?
Well, eventually, after 15 minutes of x-rays, the technician says, "Mr. Lovelace, did you get a shrapnel wound in the military, or have you been in a car accident?" And he's like, "No, never." "Other than that fall you had this morning, have you ever injured your leg in the past?" she asked. "Maybe a car accident? There must be something." He says, "No, why? I've never been in any kind of car accident or injured that leg." And he said, "I used to be a runner, but it never caused any problems with my knee." She says, "There's a tiny object above your knee that looks metallic. It's the same density as metal, and I've asked the radiologist to give his opinion. He should be down in just a minute." Now, he didn't tell her about the numb spot because he hadn't really made a connection to it. He just thought, okay, this is weird. Eventually, the radiologist comes in, gives him a second opinion, and he says, look, Mr. Lovelace, I see what looks like a tiny piece of square metal in your right leg, just above the knee. He says, doctor, that's news to me. I have no idea what this is. So they're examining this, and the radiologist gets down to his knee, and he's like, this is strange, I can't see it. And Terry says, well, can't see what? What are you looking for? And he explains he's looking for a point of entry. And he says, whenever there's something that's, entered your body, something foreign like a piece of metal, there's got to be a point of entry. There's going to be a scar. There's going to be a clear path where it's gone in. And he can't find it anywhere. So the radiologist thinks, okay, it must have happened when you were really young, so let's get out the black light and we'll be able to see the scar, because it shows up. So he turns on the black light and he's searching on Terry's knee for 10 minutes.
With a black light, though?
Yeah, because it'll show the scar. It's looking for the entry point.
I see.
Nothing there.
Never find it, yeah.
No entry point. And this radiologist says, look, I've been doing this for 23 years. I've never seen anything like this before. It doesn't look like a metal fragment from an accident. It's weird, he says. This object has symmetry to it. It looks man-made.
See, that's weird, because I was thinking for a moment, perhaps maybe they've misidentified some type of like a calcium deposit or something like that. But normally if you have something like that form, it has an irregular shape to it. For this to look man-made is strange. And of course, obviously the radiographer is saying it's matching the signature for metal.
It just looks like a square. And as they're looking at the X-ray film, he doesn't make the connection to the numb spot because, again, he's just not thinking about it. He's just wondering what this thing is. But the radiologist says, look, there's something else. If you look at the lateral view of your knee, there's this weird flower petal arrangement of objects, the same density as bone. These are round artifacts that are flat discs. So in the frontal view, you can't really see them, but from the lateral view, they're clearly there. And he's included photos of these in the book, and they really do look strange. They're arranged in a very kind of symmetrical way, like it's a pattern. Now, as he's in this examination, it's starting to get busy. There's people milling around, and there's other things for them to do. So in the end, the physician just says, "Oh, they're Baker's cysts." So
what's a Baker's cyst?
It's just a cyst. It's like a benign cyst.
Right.
And he's told, "Oh, look, it'll go away in a few weeks. Just rest up, and it'll be fine."
Yeah, that perfect symmetrical piece of metal that you have in your leg. Don't worry about it.
And he gets a sense that this is weird. It's too busy for them to deal with. So they're just like, "Oh, it's a cyst. Off you go." So it turns out they were actually correct. It did go away after a few weeks. The pain in his leg was fine. A bit of rest, solved the problem. But it didn't explain this weird piece of metal that was under his skin. And the origin of it troubled him as well. He called up his older sisters and said, "Look, was there anything that happened when I was a kid? Some kind of accident where I might have got this metal in my leg?" They said, "Nope, can't think of anything." A few weeks later, he goes online and he wants to check the x-rays again because you can access them on this online system. And he pulls out the radiologist report and gets the x-ray scans. And it's got this entry from his visit on October the 23rd, and it just diagnosed his problem as a Baker cyst, but made no mention of the mysterious objects. And then there was another report dated October the 25th that noted the objects below the knee and referred to them as round artifacts. But it didn't mention in the report this square metallic object that was clearly visible on the x-ray. You can clearly see it. The report simply said, "Impression, abnormal knee, rule out Baker cyst." So this metal piece, it bothered him so much, he started to ask surgeons to remove it. He's like, "I want this out of my body." But they all refused because the surgery risk outweighed any issue with the metal. And it was true, it wasn't really causing him any pain. It wasn't really a problem in his life, so no one would remove it. But it did open a door to a flood of memories. He said, "What this piece of metal, the size of a fingernail, dredged up from my psyche were incredible memories of events from 40 years ago or more. There are memories there I didn't want to revisit and prayed I never would." 8 weeks after his trip to the emergency room to get this checked out, the nightmares resumed. said my wife and I were wrong to assume that the events from our past would remain in our past. It went unsaid between us that the subject was a closed chapter. We had enjoyed a 40-year hiatus with only a couple of nightmares as intense as these. The anomalous things they found in my leg awakened memories of real and horrific events. The scab of a partially healed wound was ripped off unexpectedly and raw nerves were exposed. You see, back in 1977, he writes, his wife encouraged him to begin a journal as a way of coping with the nightmares that haunted his sleep. So he'd actually been recording everything. And he'd hoped that once he'd put those things on paper, they would drift away. But now they were coming back. These nightmares were coming back. They were the things from his journal. So the story, the tale he's telling, it keeps referencing something that happened in 1977. And it's not explained until later on in the book what this is. But in March of 2013, again, still suffering from these nightmares, he goes back online and he wants to take a second look at his medical records, look at these scans, look at the radiologist's report. He goes to the report from October the 25th and realizes that it's gone.
Gone?
Yeah, in its place is a second report from a different radiologist with a later date. It makes no mention of the artifacts. All it mentions is the Baker cyst. No mention of the metal object. And it's like the language has been changed to suggest that no prior report ever existed. And he can't figure out what is going on. Why has this been removed? Where is this record? He's got copies of the x-rays, so he knows it happened. But why would this report just suddenly vanish?
It could simply be maybe to cover up incompetence. Perhaps the first radiographer got it wrong.
Maybe. So through 2013 and 2014, the nightmares continue. He wakes up screaming in the middle of the night.
Is his wife experiencing the same nightmares or just him?
It's just him. She would do her best to calm him. And again, she would encourage him to write down his dreams. And his journal started to tell a story. And he realized that the dreams were progressing chronologically. And after a few weeks, he reviewed his prior journal entries from 1977 and realized he was actually reliving the same memories from the event of that year. So again, we're going to get to what the hell happened to this guy in 1977, why it was so traumatizing, and what the connection to this metal object is. So he goes back to his experiences as an 8-year-old. And of course, lots of things are scary when you're 8. But he references this particular night where he woke up and from his deep sleep. And he has that sense that he's not alone in the world. He can sense someone else. It's that creepy feeling. And from the corner of his eye, he sees a shadow move past his closet door. He switches his gaze in that direction and it'll dart to another part of the room. And he starts listening and he can hear faint voices, but he can't make out the words. And he says, "This night I heard them before I saw them. Their words were faint and friendly at first." He hears the words, "Terry, Terry, everything's okay. Won't you come and play with us?" And out of the darkness steps 4 little monkeys. He said they were grey and about 2 feet tall with large yellow eyes. At first I thought they were kind of funny. All 4 of them wore the same broad grin, he said. They had long arms and a tail. These were real monkeys, and I was fully awake. It wasn't a dream. The one that was closest to him speaks to him. It says, "Come with us, we'll have fun." He said their lips never moved. He heard the words, but their faces were all locked in this eerie grin. And it was all as if these monkeys were wearing the same masks. It felt like a standoff, like they were trying to lure him to come and play with them. And he considered going, but there's something in the back of his mind questioning, where are they going to take me? Am I going to come back? Is this a good idea? Have I gone with them before? Why is this so familiar? And these weird monkeys start to form a semicircle around his bed, moving in closer, and he hears them clearly now say again, "Come play with us. We'll have fun. We'll take you back home in just a little while." Now he realized these weren't his friends, of course, and this wasn't right. Now fully awake, he starts screaming. "Mom, Mom!" Screaming, screaming, screaming. The whole house gets woken up, and his dad bursts in, turns on the light, and he watches as these monkeys kind of dissolve as the light comes on. Now, his dad scoops him out of bed and immediately says, "What's wrong? Is it the monkeys again?" So we learn that this is a recurring nightmare for young Terry. His parents are really frustrated because he's screaming so often like this. He's waking up the whole house and always terrified of these monkey men. So in this early chapter, we hear how his mother tries to get to the bottom of this because it can't keep going on. He can't keep waking everyone up, including his older sisters. She says, look, Terry, help me understand why these monkeys scare you. Are you afraid of all monkeys, like the ones at the zoo or monkeys on the TV? He says, no, Mum, it's just these 4 same monkeys that come into my room. They look like real monkeys, but not like monkeys on TV. These are monkey men. They want me to go with them. Sometimes I think I'll go. Sometimes I even think I've gone with them before. His mother presses on, saying, but you know monkeys can't hurt you. Have you tried telling them to go away? You can just tell them you don't want to play with them and they'll go. You can do that. You know you can do that. And he's like, okay, Mum, I'll try. I'll get them to get out and leave me alone. And I'm still afraid they might take me away. And he starts crying. This is really upsetting for him. So they eventually leave the hall light on for him. But they basically make an ultimatum with their son saying, look, this can't go on. You can't keep sleeping with, your dad and I. Stop waking up your sisters. This has got to stop. You're 8 years old now. You're getting too old for this. So that evening he comes home from school and his dad is cheerfully telling him to come into his bedroom. And his dad shuts the door and he's holding a 1/2-inch roll of weather stripping. And Terry says he's confused. He's like, what is this, Dad? And bending down on one knee, his dad says, look, son, I can fix the problem of the monkeys getting into the room at night. I've brought some special anti-monkey tape that's guaranteed to do the trick.
Nice try, Dad.
He's like, Dad, you really can? And he's like, yep, this will totally block out the monkeys, the monkey men. And what the dad doesn't realize is that in Terry's 8-year-old mind, this has just confirmed that the monkey men are real.
Of course. Yes.
He's like,
yes.
If Dad's got tape, if they actually make tape that blocks out the monkey men, that means it's not in my dreams. This is real. The monkey men are real. Holy shit. And he's like, my dad's never lied to me before. The monkey men aren't real.
I guess you can't blame the father though, because it sounds like they're at the end of their rope. Yeah. At the end of their tether. What are you going to do? Your kid's waking up screaming. You're going to try something.
Absolutely. So his dad tapes up the bedroom. And it turns out
monkey straight in 2 seconds later.
No, it turns out it works. 8 weeks pass and not a single monkey man. It's like it seemed to have worked, but this reinforced his now strong idea that the monkey men were real. Now, a few months later, he describes being in the backyard on a beautiful sunny day in spring. He's playing with a bow and arrow outside. And all of a sudden he realizes that the neighborhood sounds, like the dogs barking and other kids playing, have suddenly stopped and it's eerily quiet. And he essentially describes in broad daylight a large flying saucer hovering over him in the backyard.
So he's experiencing the Oz effect, which is so typical with these encounters, and a UFO shows up.
Yeah, he's just dumbstruck. And he says it looks sexy, like a brand new sports car. And he can't stop looking at this thing, but for some reason he's completely apathetic. Like he just feels the urge to lie down and look at it. Not scream out for anyone to take a look, not run inside and get his dad's camera. He just lies down and checks it out. He's just amazed at this aluminium silver floating disc, and there's this feeling of static in the air and the smell of ozone. And after about 10 minutes, the thing just flies off. That's when he realizes, Mom! Mom! He starts screaming.
There's this idea that some craft, whatever what it means it is, we don't know, but they somehow project or emit some type of ray or energy that subdues people. And the moment that it leaves, that its effect is gone and the kid flips out.
His mum comes running out to the backyard. What the hell is wrong with you? The neighbors are going to think you're crazy. He's like, Mom, I saw a flying saucer. He's flipping out. Now, she's had enough of this. And when his father gets home, he's really angry. He thinks flying saucers are nonsense. And his sisters are teasing him. Oh, did the monkey man fly the flying saucer? Oh, Terry. Just constantly teasing him.
Yeah.
The kids in the neighborhood start calling him Saucer Boy because his mother's gone and asked other mothers if they saw anything. And they're like, what are you talking about? So now he's getting teased by everyone.
Does your son see flying saucers every now and again?
Yeah, did you see that flying saucer? Because my son just saw the flying saucer. So he's just having a horrible time. No one will let him hear the end of it. But the consequences of seeing this saucer is that the nightmares return. These horrific nightmares get worse. Now it's shadowy figures grabbing him in the night, carrying him away with all these hands. He's taken away, he's held down by a man-sized bug that seems to hurt him. It's almost like a giant praying mantis. And in this dream, it's impossible to run and it's also impossible to scream. Now, the family starts to notice changes in Terry as well. After he saw this flying saucer, he's now afraid of the dark. He's afraid to go outside. He doesn't want to leave unless he's under the streetlights. And there's this odd detail. They had a neighbor who was a kind Asian woman, he said. We called her Sue. And he said she had an amazing flower garden and baked things for us. She was a close friend of the family. And all of a sudden, her appearance made him nervous.
Oh, that's weird.
Couldn't figure out why. He had just had a fear of her all of a sudden, even though he had known her his whole life. So eventually his father's getting really annoyed at all this, this nonsense. So he takes him to the doctor, and the doctor basically diagnoses the kid as watching too many cartoons and being a liar.
Yeah.
So the doctor won't even believe the kid, won't even take him seriously, and totally betrayed his trust. So it was a really tough year when he was 8 or 9 and these nightmares persisted. But it kind of faded after 12 months until he was 11 years old. It was now 1966. And one night, it was a winter night, he wakes up and it must be 2 or 3 in the morning, but he's sitting upright in bed for some reason. And his room is just full of crazy lights, like flashing reds and blues and greens, and it's so bright, it's like a football stadium.
Is it coming in from outside, or is it lights that are in the room?
It's coming in from something outside, and he's weirdly disinterested. Again, this apathy. It's like, oh, there's lights outside. Weird. And there's this odd noise as well, this kind of heavy pulsing. And he gets out of bed in this very disinterested way, goes to the window, and he pulls back the curtains. And floating outside his bedroom window is a giant flying saucer with this fog or steam enveloping it. And this throbbing sound, this bass sound, he can feel it in his chest, and it's actually vibrating things in his room. And he watches as this vibrating sound knocks one of his model planes off his bench and to the floor of his bedroom. But still, he has this total disinterested feeling. Not scared, barely interested in what's going on. Slowly closes the curtain, makes his way to bed, goes to sleep. Now he wakes up the next morning, no memory of what's gone on, but he sees his curtain tucked in where he went to look, and he sees his model airplane on the carpet, and suddenly it hits him.
Oh, so he's got these trigger events.
Holy shit, that was real. And he's actually ecstatic. He sits on his bed that morning and he's ecstatic. He realizes adults don't know everything. That doctor doesn't know what he's talking about. Mum and Dad don't know what's going on. I know what's going on. I know it's real. And for an 11-year-old, this is a huge thing.
It's a revelation. It's a revelation for him.
Revelation that he knows something that other people don't know. He knows that this is something not from our world. He knows that it must be intelligently controlled. And he describes as an 11-year-old trying to think this out. Where are these people from? Are they from Mars? Are they from Venus? Why are they interested in me? And, this really changes his outlook on life, but his elation is short-lived because after seeing this, the nightmares return. The stranger in his room nightmares return with a vengeance. Big insect-like things, manipulating tools, long, thin fingers. His fear of outside spaces returns. But this time it's brief. And by the end of the school year, these nightmares are gone and he gets on with his life. Let's take a break here. We'll pick up the story 10 years in the future as Terry's career in the Air Force starts. And he thinks all this is behind him. He thinks he's going to have a normal life. Well, we'll find out what happens after the break. You're listening to Mysterious Universe. Stay with us. Do you like podcasts with mystery in the name?
I kind of, I guess I have to, right?
In the name?
I'd have to, wouldn't I?
We want to let you know about a new podcast. It's called Unexplained Mysteries. Every week, the hosts explore the greatest mysteries of the past and present. From the building of Stonehenge, aliens, to the subject of the Mona Lisa, aliens. There may not be a simple answer or explanation.
Aliens.
But that doesn't mean there's no explanation at all. And these hosts dig deep to investigate Earth's mysteries. So it's kind of like a storytelling show. There's a team of researchers and the hosts use that in-depth research and analysis as they look for answers. You can check out episodes on Mona Lisa and Stonehenge now. And there's a new episode coming out every Thursday, so you can expect episodes on crop circles, dragons, and many more.
Visit Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts and search for Unexplained Mysteries. That's UNEXPLAINED MYSTERIES. Or visit parcast.com/unexplained to start listening now. That's Parcast, PARCAST.com/unexplained to listen now.
Support for today's show comes from Squarespace. Ready to start your new business? Make it stand out with Squarespace. With beautiful templates created by world-class designers, Squarespace makes it easy to turn your idea into a new and unique website. You can showcase your work, blog, or publish content, even sell products and services of all kinds in just a few clicks. It really is that easy.
It really
Even a little monkey man can do it.
well, I don't know what they would be wanting to. What would you promote?
Even evil monkey men trying to abduct you at night.
Yeah,
they could do it.
That could potentially work. You know, this is the thing about Squarespace. Is I was just wandering around their website the other day, and as much as their templates are absolutely beautiful, that's not all that it takes to have a good website. It's the actual underlying infrastructure that makes Squarespace so good. Things that you don't even think about. Like who is privacy, for example. Like it actually protects you from people being able to search your website. If you just want to create a domain that you don't want to have people looking you up, it's all included with Who is Privacy that's complementary with your Squarespace website.
I needed that when I bought BigfootDildo.com.
Yeah, well, they called you. You constantly get phone calls.
All those Indian website designers kept calling me 3 times a day.
Yeah, it's really irritating and really annoying. But
should have just gone with Squarespace.
Exactly. These are little details that Squarespace thinks about, and that's what I really like about Squarespace. But as I said, they have these beautiful templates, and it's just so easy to create this perfect website just out of the box. And they've got these analytics tools which allow you to grow in real time. And as I said, there's nothing to install, patch, or upgrade ever. Now, if you've got a question, you get stuck, they've got award-winning 24/7 customer support. They're there to help you. They're there to get your idea out onto the internet.
Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code MU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com, offer code MU. And we're back on Mysterious Universe, talking about the incident at Devil's Den, the new true story from Terry Lovelace. And before the break there, I mentioned we'd pick up his story in the Air Force, but he actually has a few experiences that are in the 1980s, which I think are important to the story because he's married, he's got a couple of kids, and in this particular incident, it's Christmas time and he's out shopping with the family. And he tells a story of how they've gone to a bunch of shops and his wife wants to go to a bookstore. So they enter the store and he turns the corner and he has a panic attack. He sees something that gives him this attack. He stops in his tracks. He can't move. His wife realizes something's wrong and says, "What's wrong with you?" And without a word, he turns around and heads for the door. Now, concerned that her husband might be ill, his wife Sheila catches up with him and says, "Look, Terry, what the hell? Are you sick? What's wrong?" And this wave of nausea swept over him and he's having trouble standing up. He says, please, just give me a moment, give me a moment. He says, "Holy shit, did you see that?" I can't believe it. It was just suddenly in my face. I'm so sorry. It just startled me. And his wife says, okay, oh God, you're sweating. What happened? What face? What are you talking about? And he says, there's a hardcover book in there. I go around the corner and have a look at it. It's terrifying.
Is it communion?
Well, she says, okay, I'll go have a look. And he expects her to come back and go, yeah, that was crazy. But she comes back and she says, Terry, it's weird and it's gross, but why is that freaking you out?
It's Curious George, isn't it?
He doesn't name the book. I presume that it's communion. Because what other book would appear in the late 80s with an alien on the cover?
Exactly. Yeah.
But he is just absolutely freaked out by this, to the point where he's having physical reactions from seeing it. He doesn't understand why. And his wife, they sit down, they have coffee, because she's concerned. She's also really concerned because this actually happened a few months earlier. He was walking past a window display at the mall, and something was being set up in one of the women's fashion stores, and there were 4 mannequins, and all their clothes had been taken off. And they were just from the waist up, but they're all of that, you know, that molded plastic old mannequin look. And for some reason, it scared the hell out of him. He had this full panic attack, and he had to leave the store from this anxiety, and his wife was really annoyed. So now she realizes that, okay, this has happened more than once. Something's not right. So she sits him down and says, look, you've got to go see a therapist about this.
Yeah,
we've got to get to the bottom of this. So he goes and sees a therapist. It's on their health plan. This woman named Elizabeth, and she runs him through all these battery of tests, psychological tests, and things like that. And the results he gets are that he's got similar stress, or it's consistent with someone who's suffering from PTSD. And she says, look, Terry, I want to know what happened in your military service. Were you in combat? He says, no, I never left the United States. She says, Terry, do you see anything common between things that scared you in the mall? And he says, look, the commonality is obvious. I saw a UFO when I was 8 and another when I was 11, and I had a weird experience in 1977 when I was in the Air Force. And he's like, oh, why did I say that shit? Because he doesn't want to tell her anything.
No.
He wants to keep it all bottled up, but it all came spilling out.
Well, I mean, you could basically assume that subconsciously he's been wanting to get it out.
Well, she says, okay, Terry, how do those incidents from your past relate to what's going on today? And her question triggers this weird anxiety, this panic in his mind. And he says, I didn't know it at the time, but I'd been programmed to not discuss what happened in 1977. He feels waves of nausea sweep over him. He feels ill, like he's going to throw up. He says, I don't think I can remember. I don't want to remember. Can we quit for today? Let's call it a day. The therapist, sensing that he's not well, says, of course, we can pick this up next week. I'll see you next Wednesday. And he basically runs to the car and feels euphoric as he gets in the car. And he says out loud under his breath, that was a close call. He stops and thinks, a close call from what? Why did I feel like I just dodged a bullet? Why did I need to run away? And he felt guilt. What's he got to be guilty about? It doesn't make sense. So there's a part of his mind that knows this is illogical. But there's another part that's so traumatized, it's kind of locked away from his conscious self.
Well, also, if there's been some type of hypnotic suggestion or something to prevent him from releasing those details, maybe it's also set that it induces feelings of guilt and sorrow whenever he does discuss it.
Well, he doesn't go back to the therapist. You know, he says he will, but he just, whatever, he doesn't want to deal with it. But he's in his office later on, about a week later, and he gets a call from her. And she says, look, the reason for my call is that I wanted to see if you'd be interested in speaking to a colleague of mine. And he says, well, what can he do for me that you can't? And she says, look, he's a clinical psychologist. He won't charge you for his time until your insurance kicks in. And he works with clients who have experienced similar types of things. His name's Dr. Paul Miller. I'll leave you his number. She eventually admits to him that he deals with people who have had UFO experiences, and he's even had his own experience. So he goes, sure, give me his number. And you know, she writes down this clinical psychologist's number in his little diary, hangs up the phone. Now, the next morning, he's on the phone with a client, and it's something routine, and he catches himself staring at that doctor's phone number that he was given. It's just in there in the margin of his calendar. And as he's on this phone call, he's just kind of half-consciously grabbing his pen, and he starts to change the first digit of that phone number.
Doodling.
Yeah, he's having the conversation, and he just changes the 5 to an S. And he continues with his call, and he moves to the second digit, and without thinking, he changes the 1 to a T. And he continues doing this with the rest of the letters. Pen still in hand, he gets to the 7 and he draws an O. And then he gets to the 4 and he draws a P. And hangs up the call he's on. And he hasn't even been thinking it, but he looks down at the phone number and realized he's written stop. And he stares at it for a moment and just kind of laughs to himself. For some reason, it cracks him up. He turns the page and pushes his diary out of the way. So I find this really interesting. He says he's been programmed. Is that the programming kicking in? Is there some kind of subconscious thing telling him to stop investigating this?
But even more so, it sounds like he's actively fighting it without realizing it. Because normally when you hear of these things with alien abductions or anything along those lines where there seems to be some type of screen memory or hypnotic suggestion put in, this is probably the first time I've heard of a actual physical manifestation of a warning to stop. So it's like maybe his brain is still kind of fighting it, but there's something that's autonomous that's physically controlling him.
Yeah, some knowing part of him.
Yeah, it's like 2 parts of his brain are in this battle. Maybe they couldn't get past one section of his mind.
Well, the next notable event occurs in 1987, and this is his normal Sunday routine, right, with his family. It's Sunday morning, he'll wake up really early, like 7:30, and he'll ride his motorcycle. And a couple of minutes away, there's some nice country roads, and he'll ride for maybe 2 hours, and he's back by 11, and he makes pancakes for everyone. It's a Sunday morning ritual. But one day on this road that he's taken a million times before, he's kind of daydreaming, and then suddenly he's on gravel. And he's like, what the hell? Why am I on a gravel road? And first of all, he says, look, being on a gravel road on a motorcycle is not fun. Unless you're on a dirt bike, it's dangerous.
Well, especially when you come off.
Yeah, there's no traction. And it's bad for your motorcycle as well, because you'll get chips from the rocks. It'll chip the paint. It's bad. And he treated his motorcycle like his baby.
I mean, your foot could come off. It'd be terrible.
Yeah, and here he is on this dusty gravel farm road, going nowhere, thinking, how the hell did I get here? So he turns the bike around and he realizes he must have made a wrong turn, maybe 5 minutes back, and ended up on this road. He finds his way back and, starts heading home. Maybe it would have been 10 minutes he had lost, of time. Anyway, when he gets into the house ready to make pancakes for everyone, his wife is in tears. Where the hell have you been? She says.
She must really like pancakes.
What the hell? I called the police. They haven't responded to any accidents. Where the hell have you been? She thought he was dead.
Why?
Because it's 12:30 p.m. He's been missing for 2 hours. He should have been back way before 11. And he's clueless. He has no idea. He's like, seriously, I have no idea what's going on. They can't figure it out. They have this big argument. They're trying to work out what the hell could have happened. He's got no explanation. And what eventually kind of calms down the argument is that his wife says, look, there's something I actually have to tell you. And I was debating on whether to tell you or not, but this weird incident means maybe they're connected. And she says, look, last Saturday night, I woke up and there was a 3-foot-tall woman standing at the end of our bed. She said, I remember reaching for you, but you weren't in the bed. She said it was the middle of the night. I have no idea what time it was. And Terry says, what did she look like? Can you draw her? She says, I'll try, but let me finish first. This woman had a dark hooded robe of some kind, tied at the waist with a cord. The hood covered most of her head, and her eyes were big, Terry. They were almost as big as that picture that you saw on the cover of that book. The one that scared you. She says she was between the foot of our bed and the window, and I saw her. She was clearly there. She said, the weird thing, though, is that I wasn't scared. I wasn't anything. This woman just looked at me, and I heard her voice in my head. She said, everything's okay. Go back to sleep. Just those 7 words. His wife said, I should have done something, but she just told me, everything is okay. Go back to sleep.
That's what I always find to be so terrifying about these experiences, because you just know the natural instinct is if you wake up and find a 3-foot woman standing at the end of the bed, you're immediately going to jump out of bed and turn the light and find out what's going on. But just be, oh, she said everything's okay, I'll just go back to sleep.
And the thing that makes that terrifying is that it suggests control, absolute control.
Yep.
And of course, that's what she did. She went to sleep. She woke up the next morning and thought, oh, that dream was weirdly real. And, you know, with Terry having that missing time, and then she also said the next morning after that weird dream she had, there was a drop of blood on Terry's pillow, just a single drop of blood.
Did she just bleeds or anything?
Yeah, well, occasionally she'll find a single drop of blood on his pillow. So she knew this was strange, and she was familiar with the Betty and Barney Hill case. So, yeah, she was starting to make some connections that Terry seemed to be refusing to acknowledge.
So, in parallel to her husband attempting to get help, was she starting to look into some of the literature and case histories?
No, not actively looking. She had just come across a story in a magazine.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So, and neither of them were interested in UFOs. It's not like they paid any attention at all. In fact, it was quite the opposite. They wanted to ignore it as much as possible. So Terry said in the book here, I didn't know it at the time, but I'd been programmed. We'd been programmed. Deep down, I knew that I wasn't supposed to talk about them. I knew these things have rules. I either followed the rules or risked being punished. So here's where we get to hear what happened in 1977. And this is 4 months after he graduated from high school. He enlisted in the US Air Force. It was 1973. The draft was over. The Vietnam War was grinding down, and he said he wasn't really looking for a military career, but he didn't really have money for college education, so he thought, if I go in on the GI Bill, I'm going to get an education, it's going to set me up. And he was trained as an EMT. He was trained as a medic. He completed basic training, did 6 months of technical training at Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas, and then was permanently based at Whitman Air Force Base, southeast of Kansas City.
Uh-oh. Hang on. Whitman Air Force Base is associated with a lot of strange activity.
Yeah, there's been a few over the years around that base.
Including Bigfoot's getting loose and...
weird sightings.
Yeah.
So when he was eventually trained, he drove an ambulance and he rendered emergency care to victims of injury or life-threatening illness. It was a pretty standard, comfortable career in the Air Force. And he talks about a good friend he had on the base. His name was Toby. He had kind of the same motivations as Terry. He really just wanted to get an education, and the guy was like a gifted mathematician, and after the military he was going to get a grant and try and study physics. So really,
a lot of people do that. It's not a bad idea.
Yeah, really smart guy. And just out of the blue one day, his friend Toby says, hey, why don't we go camping? And Terry says, well, camping? What are you talking about? And Toby says, well, what do you think about taking a camping trip? You can bring your camera, I'll bring him some binoculars, because Terry was really into photography at the time. And he kind of says, I don't know, I don't really like camping. And Toby says, not now. I mean, when the weather warms up a little, we'll go, it'll be fun. It's like, I don't know, Toby. I mean, we're city boys. We've never done camping before. Why does it interest you? And Toby's more insistent. He's like, look, just listen. It'll be really cool. We'll go to a national park just south of here. When the weather's warm, it's just a few months away. It'll be great. Just think about it. Okay. A week later, Toby comes back and he's persistent. He's like, listen, you like nature photography. You might never be this close again to a big nature preserve. I like watching the stars. There's this park just across the Arkansas border. It's called Devil's Den. It'll be awesome. It'll give you plenty of scenery. There'll be wildlife you can photograph. There's all these bluffs where I can watch the stars from. No light pollution. It'll be amazing. Let's go.
Is this guy's constant insistence starting to disturb him?
Well, he says over the next week, he started to pick up on the camping idea. And he could see the upside to it. You know, it's a short getaway. There'd be a 4-day weekend in June. We could go.
Fresh air.
Yeah, a bit of fresh air. We would spend 2 nights away, get some an R&R. It'd be good. And he starts researching nature photography a bit more. He learns that the base has special lenses and film that he can use. He's like, this is awesome. This is the perfect place to get into it. And he said, in the span of 2 weeks from this initial suggestion, the camping trip idea started to consume him. He said it was all he could think about, all he could focus on. The day-to-day grind of work was just a way to get to the camping trip. And he said Toby was the same. It was this full-on obsession for both of them. But he says the word obsession doesn't even accurately describe it. It's like all we were living for was this camping trip. Again, Toby would insist that they have to go to this place called Devil's Den. That's the best place to go in Arkansas, and they had to go there. And they start planning it. They're like, let's go, let's do it. They'd planned to spend 2 overnights to explore and a full day to relax, you know, before they had to go back to the base. And he says in the book, you know, we'd never been camping before, and we weren't adventurous guys. And he's like, I don't recall watching a nature documentary or anything on television about camping or the wilderness. Where did this idea come from? So we asked Toby, like, where did you think about this? And he says, you know, the idea just popped into my head. I don't know. They're obsessed. So finally June arrives. It's time for the camping trip. And they're like little kids. They're all super excited. They're packing the Chevy, getting ready to go. And they make this 3-hour... Well, they're on this huge, it's longer than 3 hours. It's like a 7-hour drive or something. So they're on 3 hours into the drive. And suddenly, Terry's in the passenger seat and says, shit, I left my camera in the kitchen.
Oh, no.
That's the whole point for him to go.
Yeah.
Was to take all these awesome photos. And even everyone at the base was saying, make sure you bring back some amazing photos.
But did he do that on purpose?
Well, no.
Or subconsciously?
Well, that's the thing. He says... Maybe I was so eager to get on the road that it just slipped my mind, but how could it be? I've been planning this trip for months.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like somehow, maybe while he intended to take it with him, somehow his body got him to leave it.
Well, they pull aside because they think maybe it's in the back. They pull everything out.
Nothing.
It's not there.
Yeah.
And to go back and get it would be an extra 6 hours. So they have to forget it and they proceed for their trip. And he says after another hour, the scenery starts to change and they're heading into the Ozark Mountains, you know, virgin forests and rolling hills, really beautiful area. And they eventually make it to the park, to Devil's Den, and there's like a touristy area where everyone camps. But for some reason, Toby was insistent that they can't stay at the touristy area. They need to go somewhere more isolated, more wilderness. And he's like, okay, yeah, I feel like that too. We need to get away from these people. So they go down a path that you're basically not supposed to go down. It says no admittance, no hunting, no fishing, but they drive through anyway. Eventually they run to this, they run out of blacktop and they're just on this dirt road and they hit another sign that says no entry, Arkansas Department of Parks and Recreation, and there's a chain across the path. And they're like, screw this. We need to go full isolation, no one around. That's the way to go camping. Even though they've never gone camping before, they have no idea what they're doing.
This is weird.
So they take off the chain, they keep driving down this dirt road. Now finally happy that they're as far away from anyone else as they can be. And after an hour of twists and turns on the path, they finally go up this sharp hill and they arrive at this plateau. It's like this meadow. It's kind of beautiful. There's flowers everywhere and they can see down in the valley below. It's really, really nice. And they realize, oh, this is a great spot. And before setting up camp, they think, let's take a short hike. Let's go exploring. Now it's mid-afternoon, so they plan to be back by 6 p.m. Plenty of light left to set up their camp, so off they go. And the scenery is breathtaking, they both said. It's absolutely amazing. They'd covered 3 miles, but it probably would have taken 5 miles of walking because of the terrain. And they eventually find a spot to rest, and they're saying how it's comfortable to sit back and relax, rehydrate a little bit, and just, you know, take a breather, 5-minute break. And Terry said as soon as he had gotten comfortable, he starts to feel drowsy. It's like, I'm tired from the long drive, but I shouldn't be this sleepy. And the last thing he remembers saying is, Toby, this is perfect. That's it. Lost consciousness. The next thing he knows, Toby is kicking him, screaming, get up! Get up! It's almost sundown! What the hell? How did we sleep this long? And he gets up and panics. They've got no camp, no firewood, they're losing light. They're starting to lose light for the path to even get back. So Terry stands up, rubbing his eyes, thinking, how the hell did this happen? How the hell did we sleep this long? They start sprinting back to their campsite. Running, they don't want to lose the light. They don't want to spend a night in the wilderness. I mean, they'll probably survive. Of course they'll survive. It's the middle of summer. But it's going to be
Still, you don't want to.
It's going to be hell.
Yeah.
So they sprint back. They actually make it with a little bit of light back, just as sundown's coming down to the campsite. They see the car. Now, they use the headlights of the car for light to set up the campsite. And Terry's sole responsibility, because Toby was going to set up the tent and everything, was to get firewood to get them through the first night. So he's like, okay, I'll go to the back of the car and get my hatchet. But when he goes to retrieve it, he realizes that he's left the hatchet in the garage alongside the camping lantern and the gallon of fuel that he needed for the trip. So,
These things he's left behind.
yeah, he says in the book, we weren't this inept. It's like we had subconsciously sabotaged ourselves. It didn't make sense with months of planning that we were this screwed. And Toby had made similar mistakes. He'd forgotten his good flashlight. He'd forgotten the pot for the canned beans. And he'd forgotten the beans. All they had was instant coffee and a bunch of sausages. Now, despite all this, they managed to get the tent set up. They used a rock to hammer the pins in. They managed to get a small fire going with just a little bit of kindling. And Terry said he skewered 8 hot dogs and burnt them immediately. But they laid down on the air mattresses, and he said it was kind of nice. And they joked with each other about how crap they were at camping. And as the laughter of how ridiculous their predicament was kind of faded, Terry said, I noticed the forest was silent. Not a single tree frog, not a cricket, nothing. There were none of the other noises you'd expect to hear in the forest at night. Just an hour earlier, the forest had been alive with noise, but now everything was so still, it made me a little uneasy. It felt unnatural. So we asked Toby, he's like, now that the fire's going down, I can't hear the crickets anymore. What the hell is going on? Do you think that's normal? Toby just says, they'll be back. Just wait an hour, they'll be back.
But isn't that normally for, an outdoorsman, isn't that a warning when crickets stop chirping? It's an indication that someone or something is around?
Yeah, and these guys definitely aren't outdoorsmen, as we've discovered. And he saw Toby turn his head away from him because something had caught his eye to the west. And there were 3 identical points of light in the sky, just low on the horizon. He says, hey, check it out, I've been there before. And, Terry's straining, and he says, Toby, don't bullshit me, what are you talking about? And he looks up, and there's 3 brilliant stars in this perfect little triangle, just sitting above the western horizon. And they describe in the book, they're watching this for a long period of time. It's, about an hour they're watching this thing, and then the stars start moving, staying in this triangular formation.
Okay, so that's not normal. That's not a satellite.
And they're watching as these stars also rotate on an axis as well. And moving in perfect harmony, again, for an hour, they're watching this thing in the sky. Not freaking out, just kind of chilling. And it starts this vertical ascent, slowly climbing the horizon. And they're getting brighter, these points of light, as they're flying up. It's definitely not an aircraft, it's something else entirely. And after a few more minutes, Toby, with a feigned laugh, says, I think that damn thing's heading toward us. I think it's going to sail right over our heads. Once more, Terry notices just how quiet the forest was. The crickets and the tree frogs hadn't returned. And it comes to a halt directly over their heads. And they're watching as the 3 points of this triangle spread further apart, and they realize, oh, this is an object that's blocking out the stars. It stops above them. And this single beam of light comes down into the meadow. This brilliant, bright light. And they're feeling no emotion at all at this stage. They say they're just lying there fascinated, but the apathy, the calmness.
Same factor all the time.
They said it was pleasant, even soothing. And this beam of light, as it momentarily lights up their campsite, it disappears, and a few seconds later, there's this weird pencil-thin blue light, almost like a laser, and it starts targeting all their stuff. It goes to the tent, like this blue light hits the tent, it hits their pack, it hits their car, and for a second it's just kind of tagging everything around them.
Or examining it.
Yeah, like scanning. It even scans them, it's like going to their pockets, it's going to their heads, it's doing it in a rapid fashion. And he says back then, The idea of a laser was still this new concept, but this weird pencil-thin blue light is hitting everything. And again, they don't care. They're totally apathetic about what's happening. And the last thing Toby said was, "Show's over." And they slowly get up, they go into their tents, and they go to sleep. The last thing Terry can remember is, for some reason, he really wanted to keep his boots laced up when he went to bed. Something in his mind told him, "I gotta keep my boots on, and I gotta lace them up real tight."
I wonder if he's considering that he might have to run.
Yeah, just something told him that. So anyway, the last thing he remembers is Toby falling asleep and snoring, and then he fell asleep. Now, the next thing, Terry wakes up, still in the tent, and there's bright lights outside, and this familiar sound. He says his eyes are sensitive to the lights, and when he tries to maneuver in the tent, he realizes that he's in pain. Every bone in his body is aching, and he's insanely thirsty and scared. He can't figure out what's happening, and he looks up, and Toby is on his knees, still inside the tent, looking out the tent flap, just poking out through 2 inches, trying to see what's outside. He says the lights outside were multicolored greens and yellow. They were bright in quick doses like a camera flash. And he could hear Toby muttering something. And as Terry went to get a flashlight to see what was outside, Toby quickly snatches it from his hand, holds his finger across his lips and says, "Shh, they're still out there." Now, in the flashes of light, Terry could suddenly see that Toby's cheeks were covered in tears. He'd been crying. This is a guy he's known for a long time and knew that he could keep a cool head. What on earth could move him to tears? And he starts to see shadows moving back and forth in front of the lights. He can hear footsteps outside the tent. And the apathy they had experienced before was now gone. It was replaced by terror and panic. Toby, tell me what happened. Who's out there? What's going on? No answer. Toby's in shock. Now, Terry gets the courage to pull himself closer and look out the flap of the tent. And he said, "I saw something I was unprepared for. It was so gigantic that it filled every inch of the meadow. It sat motionless in midair. It was 30 feet off the meadow floor, and I could see 2 sides clearly. They were randomly dispersed square panels of light on each side." And he said it was as big as a 5-story office building at night, with offices lit there on every floor. Along the top was a row of larger windows that slanted outward. They were all lit, and he saw faint shadows of movement behind these large panels. Toby shoved his way over my left shoulder, Terry said, and we watched together. We saw figures walking and milling around underneath this thing. And my God, he said, they were children. Maybe a dozen or more kids, all about the same height. They were milling about in small groups of 2 or 3. And he whispers to Toby, "What the hell would children be doing here underneath this giant thing in the middle of the night?" And there was fear in Toby's voice, he said, when he replied and said, "Those ain't little kids. They're not human beings, Terry. They took you too. They hurt us both." And he starts crying. Now, he says this thing alone made it feel like a threat. This black, metallic material, non-reflective. He describes the lights on each corner, this seamless panel running from the bottom to the top. And eventually, as they're watching, this beam of light, this column like a tube, comes out of the center of the craft. And it again hits the meadow, and he watches as these tiny entities that he thought were children, one by one, make their way into this light, and he says they dissolve inside it and start disappearing. Once they're all gone, he watches, well, they both watch as the craft rises into the air like a hot air balloon, and it doesn't shoot off, it just ascends and eventually disappears.
Yeah, the arrogance of these craft, though, is really interesting, because you would expect that if you're here doing something that's, clandestine, that you'd want to take off as fast as possible. But it's kind of just like, oh yeah, we'll leave when we want to.
And well, Toby says, "Is it gone? Is it fully gone?" And he's starting to breathe normally again, starting to calm down a bit. And Terry said he actually had memories that instant of what happened. He had some clear recall in that moment of what they'd gone through. He said, "We were sucked into this thing just like the little people we watched dissolve into the light.
teleported?
I remember being awestruck by the volume of its interior. Everything was either in white or stainless steel. He said, I was astounded to see 3 flying saucers parked inside it. They were aligned in a neat row at the far side, and we could see walkways and different levels. There were support structures and unrecognizable symbols on the walls. And he said we were not alone. Inside, we saw 50 or 60 other people. Afterwards, I wondered who they were and what happened to them. Did they leave with that machine? Were they even still alive? He said I knew that I was fortunate to be alive. Now, we knew that there was much more to what had gone on, but their main concern was to get out of there. They run for their car. In the darkness, they somehow make it back to the touristy campsite. From there, they make it back to the highway, and they're both wrecked. Their eyes nearly swollen shut. They're completely photophobic. The sun is hurting their eyes when it finally rises. They're covered in sores because he makes his way to like a service station and looks in the mirror and just sees that it's completely covered in these red sores. And as he takes his shirt off, he realizes that he's sunburned everywhere. Like even underneath his armpits, you know, everywhere. Yeah. Like he's been on some rotisserie and rotated. There's no way he could not have any tan lines. He's just completely burnt all over evenly. Now, Toby's in worse shape than Terry, so Terry decides to drive them all the way back. They just want to get home. They're done. They don't talk about anything that's happened on the way back. It's like to talk about the topic is somehow off limits for whatever reason. Just the thought of discussing it feels wrong. Eventually, long story short, he makes it back to his wife. His wife freaks out, takes him straight to the hospital. Immediately, he's diagnosed as being completely dehydrated. His CO gives him a week to recuperate. And a few days into the hospital visit, he has no explanation for what's happened. He doesn't reveal any of the sightings. Doesn't reveal they saw a UFO. Toby doesn't reveal it. He says they just got sunburnt and they got lost. That's their story. But a few days into his hospital stay, 2 men arrive and they usher the nurse out of the room and they tell her they're from OSI. Now, OSI is the US Air Force investigative arm. They're like, you know, NCIS for the Navy.
Yeah.
They're like that for the Air Force. And it's 2 senior agents. There's an Agent Gregory and another captain. And these special agents grill him, like treat him like garbage. They turn the light on and he's still photophobic, so his eyes are killing. They have all these consent forms that he has to sign. And they basically strong arm him into signing them. They intimidate him into signing them. They say you're going to be court-martialed, you know, you're going to go to prison.
What?
And yeah, he's like, am I in trouble? And one of them says, son, would we be here if you weren't in trouble?
Still didn't answer my question, buddy.
Yeah, well, they're really cagey and they're really forceful with him. And he signs these forms. He's like, I didn't read them. I was scared. I couldn't even read them. My eyes were still swollen shut. And they start drilling him. Why did you go to federal land? Why did you go to an isolated place? Whose idea was it to go camping? Why do you have a dark room in your home? Why did you buy special film from the Air Force store? Where's the film? Where's the photos? Don't lie to us. Where's the goddamn film?
He's paranoid much?
So they're screaming at him about this film. They've raided his house. They've taken his car away. His wife's hysterical. And they're just grilling him, but he keeps saying, I don't have any film, sir. I forgot the camera. I left the camera at home. I don't believe a word of it. Like, you're hiding the film. Where's the film? Grilling him constantly. And eventually they stop the tape recorder because they've been recording the whole thing. And he says the agent's demeanor changes. And he comes in close because they're not being recorded. And he says, look, I know you 2 knuckleheads stumbled onto something that made you very sick. And I think you know what it was. Oh, I think you know what I'm talking about, don't you, son? I know you do. He's like, yes, sir. If you come across that camera or if you have something you want to tell me, just pick up the phone. And he drops his business card onto the tray table. He says, here's my number, call me. He walks out the door. It's like his demeanor completely changed and he led on to Terry that he knew what they had seen.
Maybe he's a double agent or something. Maybe he's involved with...
Well, it's obvious that they know what's going on if they're so concerned about the camera and the film. Why would they care if there was just two guys that went out camping on federal land? Why would they want the film so badly?
Oh, absolutely. They know something's going on.
Or is there some base out there? Is there some hidden nuclear silo or something that they were going to stumble upon?
That's a possibility, but then why would you go to that extreme? It sounds like it's too much. It's over the top.
Well, as he gets checked out of the hospital, this weird old doctor he hasn't seen before comes up to him and sits him down and says, look, we've got your diagnosis. The burns that you suffered were from exposure to the sun, and there was natural occurring radiation in the limestone. And you guys were lying on some kind of uranium deposit, so that explains why you were burnt through your shirts. And the red spots were chigger bites. That was from lying in the grass, and that's it. You understand, Sergeant? And he's like, yes, sir, that makes total sense. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense.
No.
Doesn't make sense.
No.
And he says to him, we've got some strong medication for you. He says, listen, son, it can cause some funny dreams, maybe affect your memory. And every month or two, you might have a funny dream. It might seem really real, but it's just a side effect from the medication. Don't worry, son, you'll be fine. Just make sure you take the medication.
Imagine the occasional bout of space diarrhea is included here too.
And he's assigned a 14-pill-a-day regimen that he has to take. And the nurse...
14 pills a day?
Yeah, the nurse that gives it to him, he asks her, what is this? And she's like, well, I don't know. They sent it in from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. She's like, I've never seen this before. And he's an EMT, and he realizes these pills aren't normal pills. He's never seen this before. So he starts taking these pills. And every day a nurse will come from the Air Force to his home and check that he's taken them, count the pills. So he realizes pretty quickly that it's starting to mess with his head. His memory starts to go. His wife gets concerned. And she's like, as soon as you took those pills, you've been forgetting everything. He can't even remember what a spoon is after a couple of days.
Okay, that's weird. Yeah.
So he starts flushing the pills down the toilet. He's like, I'm just going to tell them I'm taking them, but not take them. And he's eventually reassigned. He's told he can never speak to Toby again. And they haven't spoken since the incident. He can't speak to Toby's wife. His wife can't speak to Toby or Toby's wife. He's been reassigned to a different division, so is Toby, completely separated, no contact ever. If you contact him, you'll go to jail.
Wow. That's, I mean, how can they do that? That's incredible.
And his new assignment is to paint pieces of wood.
What?
He's a really good EMT, and they take him to this warehouse and they're like, look, son, here's your assignment. See those 4x4s? They need to be painted white. And it's like 100 of them. And that's what he does for 6 months. He paints them all. And when he's finally finished, he's like, oh, guys, I've finished. There's another task for me. And the guy, his commanding officer says, yep, let me think of something for you. Oh, you see all those 2x4s? We need all the paint stripped from them.
Jesus.
So he has to do that for another month.
Oh, that's... So they're keeping him busy.
They're just keeping him isolated and busy. Eventually, during this paint stripping work, he's picked up by a police car. The police car drives him to this facility, and he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know why. They just say, you got to come with us. The OSI wants to see you. So he's taken to this tiny little room, and he sits in the chair and he waits. And he waits and he waits and he waits, and hours go past, and he's starting to panic, obviously a tactic. And eventually in walk the two OSI agents that questioned him so brutally in his hospital room. And immediately, without even a greeting, they'd say, where's the film? Where's the film? Where's the film? I don't have any film, sir. I left the camera at home. I didn't take it on the trip. I don't have any film. Where's the film? And eventually they say, look, we'll be done in a couple of hours. And he thinks, what are they going to do to me? It's going to take a couple of hours. And in a few minutes, this new person walks in, and he can tell from his insignia that he is a major. He doesn't have a name tag or anything, but he walks in and he's carrying this little kit with him. Looks like a shaving kit made of leather. And he introduces himself. He says, hello, Sergeant Lovelace. I'm Major Brownfield. And he carries himself more like a priest or a therapist than a military officer. And he starts getting chummy with Terry, making small talk, asking where his parents are from, talking about sports and just being really friendly. And in the back of Terry's mind, he's like, it's not right with this guy. I need to keep my guard up. And as he's getting chummy, he starts to unfold his little kit. And inside it is a very large needle filled with some yellow liquid. And so this major explains, oh, call me Brad. Make sure you call me Brad. Terry's like, yes, sir. I mean, Brad. They have this pleasant conversation. And as he's talking, he's getting this syringe ready. And he says, we're going to take you through some hypnosis. And after this is done, you'll be able to go home and all of this will be behind us.
We'll have to paint 2x4 anymore?
No more painting 2x4s. So he gets injected with this syringe and the room, the acoustics in the room changes. This is not like a hospital drug. This is something really different. This warmth spreads over.
The warmth is interesting because it sounds like it could be morphine or some type of opiate, but this has the hallmarks of it's pretty disturbing though to be just injected with a random substance. But it really does, it's strange because it does parallel with the story that I have coming up, where essentially there are entities that too use syringes full of strange yellow liquids that are used to induce different states in their victims.
Well, what's interesting, as this Brad guy starts to hypnotize him, Terry feels the drug taking over, but at the same time, somehow he's able to compartmentalize his mind. And he's only outwardly following the hypnosis prompts. Like, you know how when you go under, they say something like, oh, down some stairs, and you get to the end of the stairs, and the door, and then that'll be a fireplace. Then you'd be taking it through, and he's outwardly going, okay. But inwardly, he's doing all these tricks. Like, instead of relaxing, he's tensing all his muscles. Yeah. And he's playing Beatles songs in his head. He's doing the arithmetic, the times tables in his head. Anything he can to keep a part of his mind under his control. Mm-hmm. And this seems to work because the Major and the two OSI agents seem to think he's under. But there's a part of his mind that can still hear them and understand what's happening and is still in his control. And he hears the captain, one of the OSI agents, whisper, I'm amazed every time I see this happen. And after a few minutes, the other agent whispers back and says, is he under? And the Major replies, oh yeah, piece of cake. He was under before.